Okay, everyone. Hi there. This is Dr. Joel, the Stress Recovery Ninja. Super excited to be doing this live Facebook Live today with reoccurring infections and how they're related to MTHFR. Super important to talk about because people I work with that are exhausted, that are burnt out, that are dealing with an adrenal fatigue problem, they get super tired. I'm just looking for my buddy John to see if I can invite him to become a become. You don't have any viewers yet. Sorry, sorry about that. So I'm gonna look for John to see if I can get you on the line, John. And I don't know. I know you said you were underneath your group, and I don't remember what your name or your group name is. So you might have to log in underneath your own name because it does allow me to allow people to join, but you have to, I believe, request. So I'm gonna click out of here, and I don't know how to do that. All right. So John, if you're watching this, then you're able to. I'm gonna see if I can. There, I'm gonna add you, John, and this will bring you on the camera. So just click on that and you'll be on. That's excellent. All right. So my kiddos get sick and I catch it all the time. So I'm sorry to hear that, Haley. We're going to get John online right now and we're going to just discuss the relationship between genetic testing and reoccurring viral infections. So there we go. How do you like that, John?
Very nice.
Pretty cool. So, all right. So what's really nice about this is now we can also see the people as they're live. And then if they have any questions, if you guys have any questions, we will work our best to answer them. So John, so what I wanted to do was, well, first of all, thanks for joining us today.
No problem.
Awesome. So what I wanted to do was talk about how people that are dealing with a chronic, with the people we talk to on this page, John, stress-related disorders, they look at it as as first an adrenal problem, but as I teach, it just goes so much deeper than the adrenals. The adrenals respond to stress, but really, if you think about it, it impacts the tissues, it impacts the cells, it impacts you from the mitochondrial level. And really what happens is there's got to be something there that, as you've always mentioned, is, well, doesn't have to be, but typically there's something that's more inflammatory. And if the person's been dealing with a chronic health issue for so long, chances are it's going to be a reoccurring virus infection. So let's talk about that and just your experience with that so that we can tell the viewers that are watching this, what does that have to do with MTHFR? And most importantly, what can we do about it? So why don't we go from there?
Okay, yeah, and you're exactly right that with chronic health issues, when somebody's not recovering, there's some type of why behind it. There's some type of trigger and effect, and it goes back to some of these stealth pathogens, and viruses are, a lot of times a big piece of it in pretty much everybody, because in the world we live in, everybody's got viruses. It's just a matter of how is that virus affecting that individual, and that's where sometimes genetic predisposition comes in. So when we're talking about viruses and kind of how they really can affect the body, is they actually turn off something called or histocompatibility complexes in the body. And basically what that does is it kind of sends a false message where now the immune system doesn't even recognize that virus is in the tissues. Okay, and then the virus is in our DNA, and it's kind of like an alien movie where the virus jumps into a cell, it depletes that cell of everything until that cell's so sick, and then what happens is then that virus is going to jump to the next cell. And so there's kind of like that reoccurring component, and it causes our mitochondria to collapse. And these are the people that have, chronic issues, and they're doing leaky gut protocols. They're supporting adrenal fatigue, and maybe they're trending in the right direction, but there's a big missing piece. And these triggers or these epigenetic factors are pretty much every time at the core of this. And what we're seeing now from a genetic perspective is that there are some specific genetic patterns that people have that are the ones where this viruses just really wreak havoc. And it comes down to who's controlling who. Is the immune system controlling the viral load in that person? Or is the virus calling the shots and jumping from cell to cell after it completely destroys, all of what's in that cell and then goes to the next one? And these are the people that just kind of really have that uphill battle and, are struggling day in, day out.
Yeah, and so what I've done it where I've explained, and I was talking to you a little bit earlier about this, is think about the body's ability when you break it down into easy terms. I always talk about it in terms of supply and demand. And so if you have enough supply to meet the demand that your body needs to continue to put the virus into latency, then you're not going to continue to express reoccurrences. And so think of that like just like an assembly line where you're passing each other a little bit of water. And at the end of the assembly line, that end person needs the water to put out the fire. And that's how a virus is. And if you have this assembly line that you may have a little bit of a block, or someone drops the water, or they're just not able to get there in time to not allow that fire to build, then that's the analogy that I would use, John, if someone isn't methylating well. How accurate would you say and is experiencing these reoccurring viruses? So I guess the question would be, how accurate is that as an analogy for someone to understand, okay, I have MTHFR, which I understand is only one piece of the puzzle, but it's a major piece in terms of being able to pass the assembly line of water to the burning building to put out the fire. So maybe kind of break it down from starting from that point of view.
Yeah, and not to get too technical, but kind of to tie in, we're talking about, we're seeing specific genetic predisposition with the people that have some of these viral loads that are big drivers ongoing for them, and so when you have an infection, whether it be something that first comes to the body or reactivation of something, you should get a normal immunological response. And there's certain cytokines that are released that are supposed to control inflammation, okay? And one of the big ones we're seeing is that there's this inflammatory cytokine, this gene, IL-13, okay? And basically, it kind of ties back into mast cell activation and some other things we talked about previously. But this IL-13 gene, a lot of the people that have reoccurring viral issues or reoccurring flares with viruses or Epstein-Barr, or you kind of name it, they have a lot of genetic weakness or a lot of SNPs in these IL-13 genes. And what's important about this is the IL-13 genes are there to help control inflammation when you have an infection that hits you. Now, there's multiple research studies in the medical literature about poor methylation activity is going to be a second factor of this, where if you can't methylate, meaning you've got MTHFR mutations or you've got methionine synthase mutations where you can't take those B vitamins and methylate, it is going to dampen the body's ability to release interleukins like IL-13 in the first place. So we got kind of two stories with that, and kind of creates that perfect storm where if somebody's got MTHFR defects where they're going to be a poor methylator, where they can't elicit enough of a response for the immune system to go fight that fight and start kind of passing those buckets of water, and then somebody's got genetic weakness where they can't make enough interleukin 13 in the first place, it does create a perfect storm where now it's easier for those viruses to just jump from cell to cell and just deplete one cell, move to the next, move to the next. There's another gene that we're looking at that a lot of people have genetic weakness. It's a gene called RAD50, and there's a lot of research behind cancer and some with this RAD50 gene, but we see a lot of people that have some of these stealth pathogens like viruses where it's a real uphill battle, because what RAD50's genes do is they repair your DNA. And so if you've got a virus in your cell basically creating destruction and you don't have activation of these RAD50 genes to kind of come and try and help clean that cell off, and then you got some autophagy issues, which is kind of another topic, it really creates a perfect storm. So besides MTHFR being a big component affecting methylation, which affects so many different functions, the people that have reoccurring virus issues or have chronic viral load on the body that's creating symptomatology, like Epstein-Barr or some of these herpes simplex viruses, they got MTHFR mutations. They've got these IL-13 mutations. They've got the RAD50 mutations. And if people have these, it's really an uphill battle. And it's like you got to kind of reprioritize. It's something where you just can't go in and try and do certain herbals or supplements or homeopathics or medications for the virus itself, you've got to do some other things to maybe first is affect methylation activity, and maybe do some things to stimulate the mitochondria in terms of nutrients. And maybe you have to do some things to really kind of dampen that inflammatory response, whether it be controlling histamine and mast cell activation. So, some people, like I said, everybody's got viruses, and some people have viruses and have really no residual issues, but some people have debilitating chronic effects because of these viruses that it literally just sucks the life out of them day in, day out, destroying their mitochondria.
All right, so I'm gonna make it simple for you guys, since this is a very complex topic. So think about, first and foremost, stress, right? And we've always talked about stress is the analogy of cars on the highway. So we're not even looking at the actual highway. We're just looking at stress. And there's also research that shows now that, or it's been around for a while, is that the higher circulating glucocorticoids that you have, the more likely that viruses are going to reactivate. So there's that whole connection. And what John is saying is that the more stressed that you are, the more likely that when you have a virus, it's going to re-express itself. And that's really what we're talking about. So as far as, let's say, John, that there's the RAD gene, there is the IL-13 gene, and then there's these methylation genes. And let's just say people have them to some extent where both parents gave them copies, which means they're homozygous and they're even slower at replicating that enzyme that helps support the immune system or helps support turn off the expression of a virus. What can we specifically do about it? I guess, like, what would we do? And I'll, before you answer that question, versus even if I didn't know about that and I just assumed guilty until proven otherwise and said, okay, let's just assume I didn't do my genetics and that I have the MTHFR or I don't, and I'm not methylating very well, I'm under a lot of stress, and then I'm not set up genetically to make an immune response and repair my DNA. Let's just say all those things are going on. Why does having the genetic information help us, and B, assuming guilty until proven otherwise, is there actually anything we can do about it, or is it just a foregone conclusion that you're just going to have reoccurring viruses all the time? So let's answer those questions.
Yeah, so first step is kind of where healthcare is going. You're going to see a huge evolution into more of this genetic information kind of becoming a priority. But a lot of people have had genetics ran, already through, whether it be, practitioner doing 23andMe or Ancestry.com on their own, things of that nature. And some of these genes are in those reports, but the first step is finding out of these methylation-based genes like MTHFR or the IL-13 genes or the RAD50 genes or genes that deal with histamine and mast cell. It's having that information to figure out, like, where's a priority and how do you prioritize this? And it's pretty easy to do once you have the information in front of you, and comparing that to your symptoms as well as comparing it to laboratory components you have. Because here's the thing, is, I know, Joel, we've talked about this before, is let's just use Epstein-Barr virus as an example. Most people will get, Epstein-Barr virus checked by their doctor, because if they have chronic issues, and it might be their medical doctor, maybe an alternative doctor, whatever it may be. And what we're talking about is the difference between a chronic infection and a reactivation aspect. And so, when you look at a blood panel that looks at Epstein-Barr virus, and this can follow for pretty much any pathogen in the body, there's the IgM response, there's an IgG response, and there's other components that deal with immune function. And so if somebody's got an elevated IgM, it means that they actually have an active infection going on, whether it be the first time they pick it up or a reactivation aspect. The IgG markers are the ones that indicate that it's a past infection. Now, the problem lies is, even beyond, getting back to the genetics in a minute, is that a lot of people will go get these blood markers ran and their IgM is normal, but their IgGs are elevated, and their doctors tell them it's not a problem, it's just a past infection. Okay, and I know that some of the immunologists that are big researchers we talked to, they say that, hey, if those IgG levels are 3 times the upper limit of normal, it probably is a problem. And I've seen many IgG things come back where, like, the lab's cutoff is like at 17.9, and their labs come back at greater than 600. And they stop counting at 600. Is it 601? Is it 6001? And the problem about blood work with this is that's measuring the virus in the blood, the immunological response in the blood. And these viruses live in tissues like the adrenals, like the thyroid, like the muscles that indicate symptoms are going on. And so from a genetic standpoint, if you know that you have symptoms that may fall into this pathogenic components, or you've got laboratory things that confirm a previous infection aspect, to me, the next step is you got to look at genetics, because it's not cookie cutter. It's not one size fits all. You got to figure out where are some of the biggest weaknesses. Is your weakness in mast cell activation? Is your weakness in methylation? Is it in these IL-13 or RAD50 genes? And if there's more of a genetic fault, or now we're talking back to the highway, if there's less lanes available now for that traffic, it helps you prioritize on where to start, because some people can just jump in and do, homeopathic or herbals or supplemental things to dampen the viral load. From an immune system standpoint, some people, it may need to be, they got to start with methylation. They got to get their methylation cycles and transsulfuration cycles, the glutathione levels up. Other people, maybe they need to maybe do a whole bunch of mitochondrial support first before they even start talking about, trying to dampen down that virus with some things that people read on, or maybe a doctor, recommends to do. And then other people, maybe it's like, hey, they got to control histamine and mast cell activation. So it's there. And we're talking about, like, what do you do about this? I wish there was something in this Facebook Live we could say, hey, if you've got virus issues and these are reoccurring and you got symptoms, do X, Y, and Z and you're going to get better. But the thing is everybody's been doing that. They're going to doctors, they're reading stuff on the internet, and they're doing all the things that typically address the viral issues, not knowing all these other pieces and how they kind of intertwine and connect. And once people can simply get that information and say, hey, I got a lot of genetic weakness in these IL-13 genes, this is where I got to start. I've got a lot of genetic weakness in these RAD50 genes. I got to start with just really pulsing up mitochondrial-based nutrients so that I can tolerate doing other things, kind of that next or that second or third kind of layer of support.
Yeah. Okay. So really what we're talking about is, imagine with traditional medicine that is great when it comes to, no one's going to argue about, it's great when it comes to acute-based conditions, right? I mean, nowhere else you'd want to be in the world than the United States when you have, God forbid, a major problem, trauma, rupture, stroke, cardiovascular. But when we're talking about a chronic condition like a virus, where almost the dogmatic endocrine, less I get in more trouble than I should, society is more of, it's IgG, it's past infections, and besides that, there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So just take this, this viral supporter that will help decrease or dampen your immune system. But we don't really look at it as, A, it's a past infection, it's not ongoing, it's not reoccurring, and B, there's nothing we really could do about it, so don't worry about it, or just take like a cyclovir. So what John is saying is, when you have a genetic test, now you have this whole other compass, this whole other dashboard of putting together a game plan. And this is where I don't even just think where an MTHFR crash course, John, is helpful for going to the end user, like the person who's suffering, but really educating doctors, right? And saying, hey, look, there's this whole blueprint you can put on the table, and you can say, what is this person's chief complaint? Are they dealing with exhaustion? Are they dealing with fatigue? Are they focusing? Are they concentrating? Are they getting through the day? Are they depleted in energy? What is it that they're dealing with? Okay, let's say they have a really high EBV titer. It's 3 times the lab value, and it's not even 3 times. I mean, it's almost 40 times, right? It's a lot way higher. And we really know that you have a viral component here. When we open up your methylation cycles and we see that there's some major weak links in the way that you methylate, we know where in that assembly line that the ball is being dropped. So we don't just have to close our eyes, shotgun the approach, and then take a pharmacy, although sometimes that happens, but a pharmacy of, let's just give everyone in every single part of the assembly line something and just hope that that works, right? So really what John is saying is, when you have that methylation component, that DNA component, and the test in front of you, and you understand that, hey, this is a reoccurring infection, what you're feeling is not in your head, that you're really dealing with something that we can support you with, and we can start here by giving you support in this area, or if, so let's talk about, John, let's say, what is the DNA support that you would give? Or what is the IL-13 support that you would give? Or what is the methylation support that you would give? So people who are on the call can walk away and say, hey, I think I got a problem with my DNA and I checked my RAD50 genes, or I think I got a problem with my IL-13 and I try my IL-13 genes, or I know 100% I have a problem with my methylation genes. What do I do, like, supplement-wise? What can I do about it?
Yeah, so when you're talking about like the IL-13 component, you're kind of getting back to two sides of it. You're talking about supporting immune system function, and there's things like, turmeric, resveratrol, what's your vitamin D status, what's your glutathione status, when you're getting into supporting mast cell components, that kind of ties back in that IL-13. There's things you can consider, in terms of, stinging nettle extract, quercetin, luteolin is very promising in the research for helping people support or keeping their mast cells more intact from this, when they get stressed out due to these viruses jumping from one cell to the next. When you get into the RAD50, gene, in terms of, mitochondrial support, some of those kind of same kind of components, turmeric, resveratrol, tannins, like, green tea extract and grapeseed extract, those are really, really good starting points that are going to be pretty safe for people. You can get more aggressive, you can do more things, but if somebody's listening to this call saying, hey, I have a genetic report, I see these IL-13 genes, I see RAD50 genes, that is someplace a good place to start. And one of the biggest things I see is maybe somebody's not dosing high enough. Maybe they're taking just kind of what the bottle recommends, and realize if you've got genetic weakness with these genes, you maybe have to push that further because there's more of a demand on your body for that nutrient to dampen that down. And so you may have to go, 2 or 3 or 4 times above the recommended dosage to even make a dent in it. And so sometimes, that is a big factor as well, as like, hey, maybe somebody's done some of these nutrients before and we're like, hey, that really didn't maybe help, in this process. But you could take some of those nutrients and start pulsing it up and up and up until you start noticing that, hey, maybe that fog lifted. Hey, there's something different, which is going to give you insight that, hey, there's a shift going on in terms of my mitochondria are a little bit more stable. I like doing a lot of, precursors for like electron transport chain function in terms of, pulsing up NADH and CoQ10, to get more stability there as well. So those are things that people probably are doing from time to time. But if you got these genetic factors that are there, sometimes you have to maybe push that a little bit more because of your genetic predisposition.
Yeah, and that's where the fine tuning really matters, because you're not going to tell someone, hey, I want you to go 3 times the dose on closing my eyes and hitting the dartboard on somewhere where you don't have any insight on. So that's super important. The other thing that I teach, John, which is really the stress component of it, like we teach a lot about, just slowing down and taking time and smelling the roses. So I look at the way that those methylation cycles work. My mind just kind of works like this, where you remember the monkey that would be like with the circus performer, where they would have the crank going and the music would be playing and the monkey would be dancing because of that music cranking faster. That's kind of how I look at when methylation cycles are spinning out of control. They're really cranking, and that's when you can have an impact on those highways. Even if you don't know where the ball is being dropped in those methylation cycles and where your weak links are to double or triple your doses, you can look at it just surely and purely in how we process and what is our ability to put the cars on the highways. And I think that's really key, John, in terms of when we go through this MTHFR crash course and talking about, okay, here's how we want you to think about the analogy of the cars on the highway. The cars are stress. Highways are genetics. Tolls are cofactors. Car accidents are inhibitors. And here's the prioritization of all of those variables dependent on what you, patient, Mrs. Jones, is dealing with. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about the reoccurring viral thing, because I guess I would ask you this question. How much of, and the reoccurring viral thing is, again, being the cars on the highway, right? I mean, you had the perfect storm of, unfortunately, getting exposed to EBV, living in the world that we live in, and HPV and CMV and all of these other components. I know you got really big into supporting people's viral infections, because when you're playing at the top level like this and you're dealing with the sickest of the sick, you're seeing a lot of people that have these viral components. So I guess how much of a variable do you feel this is for people that are just raising their awareness and thinking, wow, maybe this is a viral component for me, and maybe this is a methylation component for me? How often are you seeing that with the people you're working with?
Pretty for me, 100% of the time, or pretty darn close to, because, I work with patients. Pretty much every patient I work with has a confirmed autoimmune issue, or I see a lot of kids that are on the spectrum that have a lot of these pathogenic components. Like I said, everybody has pretty much had viral issues exposed to something. Kids are born in this world with a lot of those viruses that are vertically, are transmitted to the, developing fetus. In my opinion, and this has been said by many, viruses are the number one trigger for autoimmune issues. Okay. And it really comes down to that perfect storm is, well, if everybody's got viruses, why isn't everybody experiencing these chronic symptoms? Well, it goes back into the genetic predisposition that you go into it with. And so it does create that perfect storm. And if it's one of those things where if it was just the viral issue and somebody's got, doesn't have a lot of these genetic factors and they have a flare, well, maybe their immune system takes care of it on their own, or they can do certain things that really can help viral, load in the body, like, echinacea, licorice, the glycerized licorice component, thuja, St. John's wort. Those are really great herbal components. Or there's homeopathics that can really do that. Or maybe somebody's taking the medication that dampens it down. Those aren't the people I see, because I see the people that have a lot of these genetic factors going into it that allows that virus just to take over. And so then it really becomes a component of where do you start and how do you prioritize this, because it's different for everybody. And that's where the genetic aspect kind of gives you a roadmap or shows you what rabbit holes you got to go down first. And in our MTHFR crash course, we're going to kind of teach people the basics in the second half of that course of how do you recognize, or if you already know you have these, pathogenic components because they've been tested by somebody else. Now, how do you correlate that to your genetics to give you a better starting point in terms of, okay, I got to do this first and then this second and this third, rather than just jumping in and saying, I got to dampen down that virus. If I don't, I'm not going to get better. A lot of times that's not the starting point. There's foundational things that people have to do, and a lot of that goes back to their genetic predisposition.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're doing this Facebook Live today, John, because even when you and I reviewed, hey, how can we give more value to people that really need to hear this information? And that's how we came up with the MTHFR crash course in the first place. And then we read through it and it's like, well, I think people don't realize that it's the MTHFR is just one small part of it. And obviously finding out where the assembly lines are not working effectively, or the highways or so forth. But really, it is that perfect storm where, hey, when we talk about genetics, we're talking about not just the fact that, like John said, you inherit mom and dad's DNA, but you inherit mom's environment. And it would be really remiss of us to talk about genetics and not put it in context with, hey, you inherit environment and genetics. And the MTHF crash course is really all about teaching you how the two overlap, especially for the ones, like, people ask me, how bad, you probably get this all the time, John, how bad are my genetics? Like, how bad does it really look on here? And I say, well, first of all, you're calling me, so you're not like perfect and everything's great, where you felt like, oh, just proactively, I want to call Dr. Rosen and I feel amazing, so I want him to review my DNA. You're calling me because there's chance, and John, because you are probably one of the perfect storm candidates where nothing seems to work and everything you do doesn't make the next significant jump in improvement. So that being the case, we wanted to create that MTHFR course where it was about the fact that the perfect storm is being inherited by you, and not just the genetic component, and one being the viral component. So we're going to be talking about that, John. I guess, how do you answer them when they say, like, is this the worst that that you've seen? Like, what would you say to them when they say that?
I probably get that once a week. And it basically, and here's the ironic thing is what happens a lot of times is I'll get one family member, okay, that's got a lot going on. And then basically they're like, can you interpret my spouse's genetics, or can you interpret my kid's genetics? But they really don't have anything going on. We just want to do it from a preventative standpoint. And let's take a couple, maybe, one person comes in with chronic issues and we look at the genetic aspect and they've got some of these genetic players, but then we look at maybe the spouse's genetics and they don't have really any health complaints. And let's say their genetics looks worse. It's about how are those genes expressing, how are these epigenetic factors, and also kind of what's a combination of some of these genetic components and how are they intertwined. We talk about this kind of being, a chess game that's played underwater. It's very complicated at certain levels, but sometimes it's pretty simplistic, and the biggest thing I feel people don't understand is, where to start and how do you kind of look at some of these components and how do you prioritize some of these things. So big picture saying, okay, how bad does my genetics look? Everybody's got these genetic mutations. It's a normalcy, and they're getting passed down, and each generation's looking a little bit worse. And so people making lifestyle changes, with their kids and families, going to allow, a higher, predisposition to pass down healthier genes rather than these mutated copies. But it's really not so much about how bad your genetics look. It's about the perfect storm pretty much every time.
Yeah. And you know what I say I say this answer to them. I say, listen, there's times where someone has really susceptible genes and their environment isn't so bad and they're not too bad. So I say, think of the genes like the loaded gun and think about the environment like the trigger. And so I say, sometimes there's a lot of loaded guns and not a lot of triggers, and then vice versa. Think of it as there's a lot of not very many loaded guns and a lot of triggers. So you can have someone who's not really set up genetically to really have huge breakdowns, but they're an environmental trigger nightmare, right? And they're firing all over the place. So anyways, John, this just to answer a couple of these questions, Manoush has asked us about, please talk about treatment. Manoush, you'll have to watch it again, but we really did. We talked about number one, stress is the cars on the highway, and really be aware of how we process stress first and foremost. Number two is having a genetic test that shows you your susceptibilities and understands, is there methylation concerns that isn't putting out fires and turning off expressions? Are there immune system problems with the way that your interleukins or your chemical messengers are being able to be produced and signaled? Is there a DNA component where your DNA is not repairing? And if it is, John has really liked to use things like that are used in the oxidative phosphorylation or the Krebs cycle, and things like CoQ10 and NADH and D-ribose. Those are things that you may want to use at double or triple doses. Not that we're recommending that, but if you found that that was a major component to your reason for having reoccurring infections, that's what you would want to be looking at. And then if it was an IL component, we'd be looking at more immunological support. That luteolin could be super important, and other turmeric and curcumin and resveratrol. Again, it's not just a matter of take this supplement or that supplement and fix it, but I do think it's important that if you're watching this, people always say, oh, you're trying to push some kind of information, you're not giving us any takeable tools. Absolutely, we are. These are the things that you got to do on your own, but we don't want you to navigate that storm of trying to hit that moving dartboard with your eyes being closed and triple up on somewhere where you don't want to be tripling up on. So anything else to add on that, John? I mean, we'll do another Facebook Live on Tuesday talking about the case study that you talked about with looking at the histamine. But let's do this. If you guys have any questions, and John will and I will definitely like to answer them. So I'm always sick. Haley says my kiddos get sick and then I catch it all the time. And that happens a lot. We see it reoccurring back and forth to each other, right? It always reactivates there. Kayla, I hope you're doing well. You said it seems that I keep having to deal with EBV. This should be really insightful for you today, Kayla, about that. Madge, how do you eradicate the viruses? Think about it as, John, what would you say for that? Yeah.
Completely eradicating the viruses, and I always tell patients this, because of where we live in, and because people got multiple viruses, and when we're talking about kind of reactivation, it's not usually just one virus. It's usually there's multiple viral things we've been exposed to. Think about how many times you may have gotten a cold or a flu bug, or you may have Epstein-Barr because you had mono, or you had cytomegalomy. And a lot of people don't even know the viral components that they may have been exposed to. So it's usually multiple viral components. So my thought process: you're never really going to kill off the virus or eradicate it completely, but what it's really coming down to is who's controlling who. Can you change this terrain? Can you support methylation activity? Can you control mast cells? Can you support your mitochondria a little bit different? Can you, assist in expression of IL-13, which then is going to change the playing field? It's going to change the terrain where you now can do things to maybe dampen down and have a kill off of a quantity of the viral load in the body. But now what you're doing is you have changed how your immune system is recognizing that virus, and it's really shifted gears in who's controlling who. That virus is no longer calling the shots and controlling you. You're calling the shots and controlling it. And now the ability of that virus to maybe jump from one cell to the next significantly dampens down, and now your immune system kind of cope with that viral load. Because like I said, there's a lot of people walking around with these viruses that have no symptoms. Okay, or minimal symptoms, but then there's people walking around that have these viruses that it's literally sucking the life out of them day in, day out. What's the difference? And that's where the genetic piece comes in. So, completely eradicating it, I highly doubt it. Plus, you're going to get exposed to the viruses going forward, and you're going to kind of be right back in the same boats if you don't address these underlying issues with the next virus that maybe you come in contact with.
Yeah, and I always tell them too, and you've heard this, it's a verb, right? Healing is a verb. And it's not just done one time. You don't get a gastric bypass surgery and say, okay, I could eat all the food I ever want again because it's a verb where you have to continually put out more of the fire than the matches is playing with the fire so that it's extinguished, so that it's permanently locked in purgatory, so that it's locked up and it's not able to re-express itself. And that's kind of what John is saying. So Shannon, could this be associated with an ACVID? I think that's exactly what we're talking about, right? I mean, it's the same story, right?
Yeah, because, like when you're talking about, any type of immune deficiency component like that, like I said, viruses in my mindset are the number one component that affects autoimmune issues that would affect, CVID, so absolutely. And so then you're kind of in the same scenario as like, all right, investigating the triggering effects, what viruses are there, which to me, it really doesn't matter. You can spend the money on blood work to run a Epstein-Barr panel, look at IgM, IgG levels. I look at, my mindset is, when people have these genetic factors that are there, these IL-13 genes and RAD50 genes, they have this laundry list of symptoms, with chronic fatigue, they've been diagnosed with SIBO or, adrenal fatigue. It's like there is a viral component. So basically, let's get to work prioritizing these things. Hey, we've got to start with mast cell. We got to start supporting methylation. And now let's get in and address viral component. Yes, is it helpful at times to kind of know specifically what virus is there? Possibly. But realistically, viral load is in play, pretty much all the time. So, associated with CVID, absolutely. It doesn't matter what the virus name is. It's basically kind of the same approach in how your genetic predisposition is allowing this virus to call the shots.
Yeah, and I would even just extrapolate that to unfortunately, it's a terrible illness to think about, like AIDS and acquired immune deficiency syndrome. But really, it's a compromised immune system that over time, your supply and demand, like we started out with, is not being met, and you are just cashing in your savings account inside your body and depleting your body from minerals and catabolism and breaking things down. Colleen, hope you're doing well. She mentioned she works with me eradicating biofilms, and that's a big part of it as well, for sure, Colleen. And then Roxanne, I deal with EBV, cytomegalovirus, adrenal fatigue, and serious food allergies. I wish I could share this with the family. We'll upload this to the YouTube and then allow you guys to watch it and invite people over. Can viruses completely be killed out of the body? We answered that, Colleen. And then Brenda, I have no current EBV viral infection, but have high titers from past infections, can still affect current health. Thanks. So yeah, I mean, we talked about that, Brenda, with the IgG component. So if the IgG component is deemed a past infection, although the legend also shows it as a reoccurring infection, and most immunological experts in the field, even in traditional medicine, look at it as 3 times the value of the top end. And a lot of the times the top value could be 37 and you're greater than 600. And we have no idea how much greater that is. That's not 3 times. That's maybe 40 times higher. So you probably dealing with a reactivation. So
yeah. And the point on that too, Joel, is like I said, my big, the IgM component typically is measuring, is that viral component, active, but it's going to pick it up if it's in the blood,
Right.
and so if that virus is previous exposure and it's embedded in the thyroid, driving Hashimoto's, and you're trying to just control the thyroid component, but the virus is driving that in the first place. The IgM may never be elevated, but these IgG levels are elevated. It's like you have to kind of take a step back and figure out, well, why is that happening, in terms of the immune system, creating such a significant immunological kind of code, or kind of, registering that previous viral issue as significant as it is.
Yeah, and really that's what we're getting into, guys. So so still lots of time to sign up, but not too much more time. The MTHFR crash course, we're going to be getting into all of this stuff and really customizing a program for your recovery, and getting into the stress component and glucose component to a certain extent, but really getting into what John's talking about, the prioritization, and really customizing your recovery program. And that's invaluable. So we needed to talk about that today. We answered all your questions. We'll have a Facebook Live on Tuesday. We'll do that at 8:30 on Tuesday, and we'll be talking about a case study on histamine and what putting all the puzzle pieces of the presentation together looks like, and what was done in terms of nutrient support and what the outcome was, and give you guys some real actionable tools to walk away with. But definitely make sure you sign up. We're doing the MTHFRcrashcourse.com. Go to that crash course and sign up, and that way we'll be able to make the difference in your health, and get you the little solutions that you're missing out on. Anything you wanted to add on that, John?
No, I think we, pretty much, hit everybody's questions and kind of covered, as basic as we could, kind of our thought process, what we see, and kind of how genetics kind of ties into this. And just, want people to realize that, there's hope, there's still answers. And really, especially with the genetic aspect, this is such a new science, it's ever evolving. You really have to get in the mindset of never stop asking why, or never stop looking for that cause, because there's always an answer. There's always a why of why your body's reacting the way it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the most important end line is that there's always hope, and there's always more information that you don't necessarily know about, that it can be answering the unsolved mystery, and that you're not crazy, and that you are suffering with something that's real. And our goal, John and I, is not just to give you the tools to get your life back, but to make an impact on the way that healthcare is practiced, so that doctors have the tools to be able to help you, and not necessarily make bad conclusions that you're not dealing with something that you really are, and being able to give you tools for that. So hope that was super helpful for you guys. John, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on Tuesday 8:30, and we'll carry on the conversation. But make sure we go to the MTHFRcrashcourse.com. We'll put the link in the feed here, and we look forward to helping you solve this mystery. All right, take care.
Take care.
Bye.